And we're live. Welcome, everybody. This is the Reality Czars podcast, and I'm your only host tonight, Nate. Tony is unfortunately late at work, so I have the pleasure of having Matt from the Great Deception podcast on. Matt, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I love your show. Dude, you've been getting into some really interesting stuff lately. Dude, your show's fucking great. I love listening to your show.
I appreciate it.
Do you want to tell my audience, if they're unfamiliar with you, a little bit about yourself, your show, and where they can find you?
Yeah, I run the Great Deception podcast, which is kind of like an alternate history podcast where I go in and look at all different stuff. I've done, the dark side of Disney. I've done mind control. I've done World's Fairs, Star Forts, and I get into some current event stuff too. I try and stay away from that because I have another show called the Monday Night Master Debaters. And basically what I do is I get it's myself and Ryan Dean is kind of latched on as my co-host. I love it. He's been on every show, and we get 2 or 3 other podcasts on the show and going with no agenda. And it's just the whole point of it was, A, I wanted to meet people. And B, I wanted to have conversations again and get people just in groups and be able to just have on whatever and go with it. And it's been really cool, man. I mean, there's been such a great reception to that. I get people that, have actually come to me like, hey, can I hop on Monday night? And I'm like, yeah, man. I'm like, we'll get you in a slot. And so it's fun. We just go and talk and had a lot of cool people, met a lot of cool people. Connected a lot of cool people. That's the other part of it is networking and getting, people to know people. And I try to go, with people that have podcasts, some people that don't, some that are outside the conspiracy realm too, just to get all sorts of different voices. Because, as shitty as things are right now, the only way we're really going to get it any sort of fixed is if the sides can talk. We get past the red, blue, and we just get back to having discussions and get the emotion out of it. So, and that's why I started a podcast. I was getting frustrated by the lockdown, and, I had shit to say, and I didn't feel like anybody was listening, and I didn't think anybody would listen anyway when I actually recorded and put it out there. But a few people listened, so it's been fun.
Well, cool, man. I mean, I can tell that you put a lot of work into your show and that you've been doing some great fucking research, dude. I've really been liking some of the topics that you've been talking about. I thought it was super fascinating. You were talking about what was they were called Move. Is that the name of them?
Yeah, in Philadelphia.
Yeah. Yep. Man, they sounded like such a fascinating group. I love the different, I'm an anarchist myself, and I like to study the different, different philosophies of anarchy and the different, whatever they are, different groups. And the anarcho-primitivists are always they're an interesting group of cats, man. I mean, so much of it sometimes is pretty anti-human because they want to some of the anarcho-primitivists, they really just want to take us down to nothing, which is fascinating. There's aspects of Ted Kaczynski that I love a lot, actually, too. He's a fucking fascinating guy. But that whole Move group sounded so interesting. And are they still around? Is there a group of them?
Not really anymore. I mean, it's still, you can still find the group, but it's not what it was back then. Even oh shoot, I can't remember the woman's name right now offhand, but the female Africa, she is just basically going around trying to get people to understand what was done to them. Because for those of you that haven't heard it, in Philadelphia in 1985, there was this group who was, anarchists, and they basically set off a housing complex, and they blocked it off, and they were running it. They didn't want any government intervention or anything like that. And the cops didn't like it and went in and tried to serve a search warrant, got nowhere. Short gun battle ensued, and then the police decided to drop some C4 from a helicopter onto a residential building full of women and children.
Yeah, they don't like it when you question their authority and or try to establish something of your own. And you can see the difference between the way they were treated and the way that that group of Chaz Chop, you know what I'm talking about, in Seattle,
or Waco. I mean,
Yeah.
look at all these things, or Ruby Ridge and all these different examples of, and then that's what I'm kind of on right now. I'm on a government tyranny kick where I'm just kind of calling out some blatant instances of governments overstepping their bounds and killing American civilians, you know, and people are like, oh, you know, it happens once in a while. No, it happened a lot more than you think, but they're not going to teach
still
this in
happens
school.
today.
Yeah. So I'm finding out, like, I didn't even know about the MOVE bombing until I heard, I can't remember what his name is, but he was on Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence with Jack Allen, and he was talking about it. And I'm like, what is this? And so I started looking at it. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then, you know, I was looking into the Black Wall Street, which is another one in the 1920s where, you know, there was a quote unquote riot, and it was basically white versus black, and the government was on the white side, and they brought in the National Guard and just torched an entire neighborhood, the wealthiest black neighborhood in America at the time. And you just see it repeatedly, and it's happened since the inception of this country. So I just want people to really just not blindly trust your government, because as much as they point the finger at everybody else being a terrorist, in reality, they're the number one terrorists in the world.
100%, man. Every single time. Yeah. All. And I mean, it also comes back to like every single terrorist plot that you see nowadays, man. I see them as like false flags and just, you know, or just government manipulated poor saps that were talked into this shit, you know.
And it's funny how all these things that happen usually end up benefiting one side. Yeah. Right. The power never goes back. It never happens to benefit the people. It always seems to benefit the government when these things happen. It's like amazing how that happens. And the answer is always more legislation, right? I mean, that's their solution to everything. Let's just make. And as you can see, if you go back in the history, that the problem with where we are is because of legislation. We've given them too much power. We've expected them to take care of us and do the right thing. And they haven't done the right thing from day one.
Yeah, we let them when they cause this big hullabaloo, and it's really it goes back to like the schooling and how they've like manipulated us like since we were born, and so we are taught this history that government is great, that government has always been there and been beneficial and been there to try to help us, and it allows their tyranny, you know, like we put our kids in their indoctrination camps, and then we are shocked when they come out. You know, there's that quote, you know, you let your kids be raised by Romans, and you're shocked when they come back Roman, you know. And it's really, you know, it's, if you, in this day and age, man, if you got your kid in a public school, good luck. You know, we see what they allow now in public schools, dude. And it's gotten so much worse. And I think that was really telling too, is like when this lockdown happened and all of these kids were forced to, you know, do online education and things like that. Parents started listening to some of the things that their kids were being taught, and the government freaked out, and they started trying to pass things and saying like, you're not allowed to listen. Yep. You're not allowed to hear what we're telling your kids. And if that's not a red flag, I don't know what is, dude.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, the fact that the government has the balls to say, listen, it's none of your business what we do with your child. And you cannot come in here and tell us what to do with your child. Get at it. First of all, it's my taxpayer money that's going to fund you. And then on top of it, it's my kid. So if you think I'm ever going to cede the power of my child to the state, you're out of your mind. And anybody that thinks that that's okay, and that any school system that objects to you going in and looking out for the best interests of your child, you need to think twice about that and make a change. Because
yeah, man, it's always done too in a way where they're trying to they say they're trying to do something to help you, right? So
we're here to help, right? That's the Ronald Reagan thing. The biggest fear is when the government says we're here to help, or anyone.
Yeah, 100%, man. Yeah, it's just been an attack on our sovereignty. I need to slow down when I talk. And yeah, man, and like you said, it's my kid, but the government doesn't see it that way, you know.
No, well, that's a whole different story. I mean, we can go down that rabbit hole too, with the whole birth certificate and, you know, the whole idea
social security number. What does a baby need a social security number for?
Yeah, the same reason it needs a Hep B shot, you know,
Yeah.
it doesn't, you know, and
Yeah.
that's what it is. I mean, when you are born and when you are registered with the state, you are now there is a dead entity created of you that carries your name. And
Yep.
throughout your whole life, now and what is done with that is that number, your social security or birth certificate number, is traded on the stock market.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the craziest thing, man. And I was talking to my friend, I think you know him, Chud X. I
Oh,
love
yes,
Chud
I love
X.
him, man. Great guy.
When I had him on, he was talking about like, because he even did a home birth with his wife, and the nurse like insisted on poking the baby's foot and taking a drop of blood. And she was saying that like absolutely every baby in America has had their I mean, I don't know since starting when, but like that they have that Washington has a database of a drop of all of our baby's blood.
And what do you need that for? Right?
Yeah.
What good reason do you have that you need to have my child's blood? I mean, it's just, and it makes you think though, because we've been trained to think that this is acceptable, right? This is just the way things are. It's the way things have been done. And if you look, they've managed to do this in about 3 to 4 generations. I mean,
Yeah.
this is
It's
relatively
wild.
new. They started around basically the 1850s. If you want to look where we are now, the last reset, when people talk about great resets, you got to look around the 1850s.
This is
And
exactly what I wanted to talk about, man.
yeah,
Yeah,
because
this is so fascinating.
you go
The
back to,
occulting of our history, yeah,
yeah,
and the rewriting of what it means to be, well, an American or just a sovereign human being. And
the entire history. And
yeah,
that's the crazy thing, Nate. It's not just American history. It's the world. If you look across the
yeah,
world around 1850, when they brought in the Industrial Revolution, it's like they flicked a switch and everything pre 1850 was just erased. And all of a sudden now, 1850 on, we're gonna re-teach you people. You need to relearn what it means to be here. And they did it in many different ways, which, you know, it's brilliant. It's an evil genius plan, right? You got to give them credit because it was well calculated and well played out and it worked. But what they did was just, you know, they put these fronts out there. Okay. And one of my favorite ones is the World's Fairs. So you
mm-hmm.
look at the World's Fair and basically what these things were, and anyone that's not familiar with them, I've done a couple full episodes. I did one episode just on Chicago in 1893 and then a couple others. And what they would do is every year there was a World Fair. And what it was kind of, if you think of the Olympics, right? These cities would want to host this fair because people from all over the globe would get there. Now, mind you, this is 1850. So we're not talking about airplanes. They're traveling on boats. It's not an easy travel wherever you're going. So, but some of these fairs, like we'll look at Chicago, okay, because that's my favorite one. Chicago in 1893. Supposedly, it's a swampland. 700 acres. They landscape, they clear it out, they make it suitable for buildings like the ones in the background here behind me. Okay, we're not talking about these little shanty huts. They built over 200 buildings, like the ones behind me, most of them, in under 2 years. Okay, and it blows your mind. Just the construction aspect of it. You look at it, you're like, how? It just doesn't make any sense. We're talking pre-power tools.
Dude, behind my house, it's taken them longer than like 4 years to build this new like apartment complex. This like it's just wild.
I mean, it just doesn't, and it's not just Chicago. You go around, you look at Buffalo in 1901, you'll see the same thing. You go to St. Louis in 1904, you go to San Francisco, you go to Paris, you go to London. It's just, and the architecture is amazing, and it varies slightly. You get some Gothic, you get some Greco-Roman, you'll get a variety of architecture, but what it is this amazing architecture that just all of a sudden pops up out of nowhere, is what we're told. And what we're told about these buildings behind me is that they are made of wood and stucco. Okay, so that these buildings now, mind you, Chicago in 1893 had these fairs only were open usually for about 6 months. You know, it's not like a long running thing. It's a short seasonal thing, and then it would move on. Every now and then, a fair would be brought back the next year as well, but usually it bounced around, and it would go from there might be one in America and one in Europe, but it was mainly American and European cities. But this one in Chicago in 1893 drew 27.5 million people in a 6-month time frame. Again, just
That's
think about
insane,
that number
man.
in your head.
Yeah.
That they have to accommodate all these people, right? They have to have food, shelter.
I mean, I live in the Portland area, and I think the greater Portland metro area altogether has like 2 million people. So to think of 27 million people is
well, in Chicago at the
mind-boggling,
time, Chicago at the time only had 3 million people.
Yeah, that's
So
crazy.
it's just these astronomical numbers. And then the craziest part about it is they bring these 26 over, they burn it down.
Okay, sorry about that. I think I lost it for half a second. Yeah.
Yeah.
you
So
back?
no, what I was saying
Okay, sorry.
is the crazy thing at the end of the fair, they burn it down. They set these buildings on fire, and that's the end of it. They save, and what they do with these fairs, they save like one building, and they say one of them was built for permanent purposes. And it's just it's a bizarre story. Now, if you want my 2 cents on what these fairs are, essentially they're indoctrination camps. What they're doing is they're bringing in these people, and then they're coming to Chicago. They're getting educated, indoctrinated on what they want them to learn. Okay. Some of these people carried around little notebooks, and there were questions and things you had to fill out, and stamps you wanted to get in your book and things like that. And so they would indoctrinate these people, and then they would send them to these sparsely populated towns and begin populating with these newly well-trained folks. Now, anyone that didn't go along with this new way of thinking, what pops up around this time frame? Insane asylums.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they took all the people like us that are speaking out, that won't just go along and take the jab, you know, those type of people. And well, you're going into an insane asylum. And if you can't be reprogrammed, well, you're just going to rot in here. And we'll do all sorts of cool experiments on you and see what we can, you know, kind of Nazi
100%.
Germany stuff to you. And
do you know when they started doing lobotomies? Do you know when around that? Because that would be a good way to get rid of a lot of people.
Nate, the experiments
that was a little later
on these poor people. I mean, some of the stuff that it's disgusting. I mean, it's Nazi-esque. I mean, the experiments they were doing on these some of them were severely mentally ill. You know, you had mentally handicapped people, but then there was other people who were just normal people who wouldn't go along with the order. And then now because you have this, you know, also we're told there's some wars and some, you know, what you see a lot in this 1800s is a lot of devastation, destruction, whether it's natural disasters, famines, illnesses, wars. Now you start having all these orphans pop up out of nowhere, and these things called orphan trains, where supposedly the kids were brought from a combination of Europe and the East Coast. And what they would do is they would put these kids on a train and ship them out to the Midwest. And much like we were talking about before with the World's Fair, they would go and, you know, if a farmer needed a kid, boom, they would go pick up one of the orphans and bring them to the farm. And, you know, people would just go and buy orphans and bring them home with them. And it's just mind-boggling. And the ones that weren't picked up were put into orphanages, which essentially is kind of, you know, this home where they'll able to do whatever they want with you. They can sell you or move you to whoever they want. You have no guardians at that point. So there's a lot of trafficking going on, and a lot of things like that. So you see this very tumultuous time in the late 1800s where they're resetting things almost. You see these, just, well, and what are you seeing here in the US as well? You're seeing the migration west, right? You're seeing the expansion west, and the gold rushes in the 1850s. So you see that rush out there to out to California. And there's a whole lot of things, you hear about like the Oregon Trail, right? All these people making the trek west. Well, what was out there? We don't know. Was there stuff out there? Were these people going to known destinations? Because you look at pictures of California in the 1800s, and for something that was around 5 or 10 years, there's buildings like what you see in the background here, and there's no explanation. And what they say with a lot of these buildings is, again, I love word magic. They say they were founded. What's founded mean? Found dead, right? They were just found. They were empty. They were vacated from whatever, wiped out the last realm.
Dude, that's super fascinating. Yeah, there's so much there. I mean, I think about that too, is like, because I have fantasies about living back then, because it was a lot more freer. Like that would have been like an interesting time to be alive, because you could literally just pack up and move like 2 states over and just start over, and no one like you just change your name. Yeah, you're just, I'm Bob.
There's no debt. Nobody knows who you are. Yep, and that's why I got these shirts I made. Make the old world great again, man. If I could go back to like between 1850s and early 1900s, I'm in.
And so yeah, I mean, there was that aspect of it, which is really cool. But at the same time, someone could make you disappear and you could just disappear. Like and that's so fascinating too, because I mean, people don't realize that this wasn't even that long ago. I mean, I can tell you, like, as far as like putting people in asylums and things, like my mom was born in 1950. And so when she was like a teenager, I think it would have been like 1965, she got pregnant with my brother. And, dude, her dad was, if she didn't she had to give up my brother for adoption. We found him later on, but if she hadn't, he was going to put her in an asylum and then have the baby just given out anyways. Right. Yep. And so you could just do that. If your teenager was acting up, you'd be like, he's crazy, take him. And they could just do that. And that was just the thing.
Think about, I mean, a lot of people, when you ask, you try thinking back that many generations of your own family. I've talked to a few people after doing the show talking about orphan trains and stuff. They're like, yeah, my grandfather came over from Germany on a train. He might be, and they're like, and they start thinking, they're like, holy shit, like, I don't have this long family lineage. Like in the 1800s, all of a sudden, like one of my grandparents ended up here, and one was from Europe, and then they ended up here somehow with and it's all these bizarre stories, and it's almost as if,
yeah, it's both sides of my family as well, man. Because I tried to look up my last name, Chavoya. I tried to look it up, and like the first time you can find anything was in Mexico, but it was around like that 1850-ish. That's the first time I can see any record of it. Yep. And of any of my family. And then on my mother's side, she had, there was a husband and wife. They came here from Spain. And as soon as they got here, I think they must have got here around like 1810 or sorry, like 1910 or something like that. They both died of the Spanish flu after, like not shortly after they got here. And then, so I don't know when that was, and then my grandma and all of her brothers and things like that were all orphans. Mm-hmm. And they were just orphans out here, and they got passed around from different orphanages, and then they got put on farms to go to work and different things like that.
And that story is more common than we think, right? We're taught this American history and this, American dream, when in reality, the beginning of this country was a real nightmare. When you look at it, what they did to people to get what they wanted, and
well, think about manifest destiny, right? That concept. We're owed this. This is our destiny. We are going to go from sea to shining sea, and they make like patriotic songs about it that little kids sing. Yep. And what does that mean? It means that we're going to go west, and we're going to kill every single person in our way if they don't comply, and this is ours now.
Yep.
That's what that cute little song From Sea to Shining Sea is about. You're like, oh, you know.
Yeah, right. And that's what you laugh because that's what they do though. They make
Yeah.
these little jingles or they make a cartoon character or they flip it, right? Everything is inverted. And that's one thing that, you know, with my podcast, I try and get across is that you have to question everything, right? You have to look at everything, look at it as it's presented, then flip it upside down and look at it from the opposite perspective. Because then you're going to, when you see both sides of it, now you're going to start seeing a clearer picture because the truth is probably somewhere in between the two extremes. And that's how you have to approach everything now. I mean, because I listen to a lot of these, you know, researchers, and what they're doing is they're just going on other podcasts and regurgitating what they've heard. They're not doing any research. They're not going and reading any texts. They're not going, you know, to the library and looking up stuff. So it's like, how do you know if it's real? Because what I do is I'll tell people I don't know shit. I don't know anything. I've read some stuff. I have some thoughts. I have some beliefs, but I don't know much because I haven't seen it myself. So I can't verify it. And until and these people that are willing to die on these hills for things that they don't know in reality, they've never touched, it's never affected them. It makes me laugh because they're doing exactly what they want you to do.
Yeah, I mean, anyone that thinks that they know something, you know, you can kind of tell that you can't take this person very seriously. You
Yeah,
know,
they're either lying or they're full of shit.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's to me, it's the most tragic thing because I was the biggest fucking history nerd. Like that was the only. I mean, really, I would do okay in math. I could do, you know, I liked reading and writing or whatever. But like the only time that I really pay attention in class was history class, and I fucking loved it, dude. And I love the concept of like ancient history and wars and different like you know things that happened, and then you just realize that it's all bullshit.
Yep. Well, and
And
that's
it's
what's funny
tragic.
because I laugh. I got a 9-year-old and he's in elementary school. And so I follow what he learns at school very closely to the point where I've gotten a few emails from the teacher saying, hey, can you please cut back on what you're telling your son because he's causing a little distraction in class. Because I'll tell him that, like, you know, he was going over the Statue of Liberty, and so I gave him some real facts on the Statue of Liberty and some of the things with her and just things like that. And so now he's into history, which is kind of cool because you know, he started researching like mythical character. Greek mythology is his thing right now. He's into the all the myths and the different characters. And then I showed him, I'm like, hey, you like Marvel or X-Men, right? I'm like, well, look, these are the same characters, they're just in a different form. And he's like, oh, and it opened his eyes. Now he's all into this stuff, and it's really cool, you know, because not many people are into history, man.
Dude, that's such a fascinating concept. I wonder if like however many thousands or hundreds of years from now they're going to be talking about American mythology and it's going to be all about our Marvel characters and
Yeah,
there was a Spider-Man and Spider-Man.
and that's
Yeah.
what it is, right? That's all. It's their way of telling a story, and you know, they just rip off the previous power and take the story and twist it a little bit. And that's
Yeah.
all of our stories are based on a handful of myths for the most part. It's just
Yeah, I've
taking,
heard that there's like only 15 stories or something like that and they're all
yes,
just
there's some
retold
limited
and
number.
yeah.
Yeah. And the rest is just a manipulation of it because there's only so many plot lines, right? And that's what I've heard somebody say on a podcast once. There's a finite number of plot lines in a movie or storylines. And it's just
Yeah.
how you branch off of that. And that's what we've been taught, right? I mean, this is his story. It's not our
Yeah.
story. It's their version of what they want us to learn.
I mean, that is really fascinating. My mom started thinking that she was like time traveling and shit because like we'd watch a new movie together and she'd be like, I've seen this movie. Okay, this is going to happen. Now this is going to happen. And she was having like a real like Mandela effect moment. But really, I mean, I just think that it's that all of these stories, there's nothing original. And they just are redoing it. You know, it's
Well, that
like,
goes back to the
now I've got
Akashic.
this cute actor doing it, you know?
Yeah, right. Well, have you heard of the Akashic Records?
Yeah.
Right. And that's what that basically says is that there is nothing new. Everything that is being done now, has been done, or will be done, has already been done before. So,
Yeah.
and I believe that. I think we are, I don't like to label what we're in, but like it feels more and more like a simulation every day.
I've been playing with that concept a lot, actually. I actually had a pretty interesting conversation with a dude, Davey Wavy,
Oh, that's my
from Red
buddy.
Pill Cartel. Yeah, I
I
like that
love
guy a lot.
Davey.
Really good dude. And we were talking about the whole concept of like star seeds and different things like that, and just that maybe that we are beings from maybe somewhere else, and that whatever this is right now. So I mean, that kind of dips into Gnosticism a little bit. That like this might be some form of like prison planet. But like I was also talking to. Why is my brain not working today? Chris Matthew from Forbidden Knowledge News, and we were talking about this concept that like this is, and none of this is original. Like nothing's original, anyways. But just the idea that I mean, this is kindergarten for like we are in our like larval stage right now, and that so maybe this is like a giant simulation, but this is school right now, and so like all the different obstacles that are put in our way are kind of, I mean, maybe none of them are real. Like people like Klaus Schwab or like Bill Gates, it's all just manufactured. And that like our whole, like we are, our goal is to overcome this. And even if like, God forbid, they come to like kill us or something like that. But I don't know. All of that stuff is fascinating, man. And like this could be just a giant simulation and for us to learn. And so,
yeah, and what kind of makes me think that there's two things. One, we're definite energy, right? And one of the laws is the energy can't be created or destroyed, right? So no matter whether we're alive or dead, our energy continues on. And so from that standpoint, when I look at that, then I start thinking, I'm like, wow, if we're just energy, we're just recycling. Right? You're going in and this is just the form I'm in right now. I got a meat suit today. Next trip I may show up in a gorilla suit, or whatever, or I may come back in another meat suit, and I may have to do the meat suit thing multiple times until I get it down. And then when I get it down, okay, then I can move on. And I really,
man.
I'm starting to lean on that because I was on the Upstate Unconventional podcast with my buddy Nico. And I've never really talked about paranormal before, but one of the things that I've had in my lifetime, I've had recurring dreams or nightmares, however you want to, and I'm a World War I trench soldier.
That's fascinating.
And I've had the same type of dream, I wake up and I still smell it. Like I can feel the like dampness of it. And I'm still there when I wake up. And I've had a few times when I woke up in a cold sweat from it. So I feel like that's almost like a past life, that's just popping in while I'm in that state.
That's so fascinating, man. I mean, for me, my entire life, I've had something similar. It was pre-World War I, though. I've had these like dreams of like just being an ancient fucking battle, like wielding axes and fucking swords, and it's real as shit. It's like Game of Thrones on steroids. Since I was a little like fucking 2 years old, I would have these like memories of these dreams of just being in battle and just gore and killing and awful. I mean, I enjoyed them. Because it felt like a video game in the dream, and Emmanuel Kingman has a really interesting thought about that. He actually thinks that it's like genetic trauma he actually thinks that it's from our ancestors. So it's like ancestral trauma that we're like remembering because like some of this is in our DNA, and that we're remembering memories from our past, from our ancestors and things like that. And so he doesn't think that we come back, and I'm open to either, but I think that's also fascinating.
Yeah. And because either way, whatever you're carrying is being passed on through your genes.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
So whether it's you physically moving on or your energy moving on, you're going there one way or another. And that's
you are a piece of your ancestor. And so it is kind of like you are coming back. That is a fascinating concept that like, if you have a child, you're not dying. A piece of you is living on, which is so fascinating.
I don't know what to think of that, because I'm like, man, I've always debated it, right? Is this just a one and done, or is this, I get reruns of this. If I screw it up this time around, all right, I learned my lesson, I come back next time and I have that in the memory bank, I don't know. I just, it's one of those things that I love to throw around. It's one of those brain teasers, and I like to ask it to certain people. And if you get that, that fluoride stare back, okay, it's
Yeah.
time to leave this conversation.
See, and that's the other concept too. So if theoretically, if we're star seeds, or if we are from something else, like you could even say a different realm, right? And we come down here to learn, because maybe that's all being a star seed is. Maybe you're not like living on Jupiter. Maybe we are all just in this like waiting room, right? Something where we come down. How many of these people that we interact with are like really that NPC meme? Like, how many of these people are just an algorithm? How many of them are just obstacles? Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, they could literally just be obstacles, or like things that we're supposed to overcome, we're supposed to interact with, or supposed to learn something from. And we are like spending time arguing with these people online when really it's a bot. These people that you work with, these people that have their triple MAGA jabs and have the Ukrainian flag on their profile and just do whatever, and like you said, the fluoride stare, and you're like, this isn't even a real person. This is literally just a computer. I don't know.
I don't know, man, but you're seeing it more and more. And one of the things that's interesting when you say that about the bots, I'm like, one of the things I've noticed a lot is, depending on what type of mindset, I guess some people would say what kind of frequency you're in, right? Some people like to say that if you vibe high or you're in a low vibe frequency, you tend to attract those type of people. Well, if you're thinking about it from a bot perspective, yeah, they're going to be drawn to whatever they, are feeling. So if you're in that low vibe, and you're going to draw those low vibe bots. If you're in the high vibe, you're going to draw those high vibe bots. And that makes things seem a lot more realistic that way, to explain at least what's going on out there.
Yeah, because so much of your reality is just a reflection of you. Like, you make your reality. And I do find that interesting, because I've been kind of exploring the concept. And of course, I mean, I kind of believe in these things like an interdimensional being, whether you want to call that like an angel or a demon or an alien or Bigfoot or whatever these things are, that ghosts, spirits, like your spirit guide, all of these different things that we commune with, or whatever they are. And I do sometimes wonder, and we just had Chris Matthew on. I think we're putting out the episode tomorrow, but we were kind of exploring this idea of these interdimensional beings. And maybe when you contact this being, like whether you're on like ayahuasca or deep meditation, some sort of, and they could be just literally a reflection of yourself. And that's what you find. I mean, because so many people think that we're actually shooting to another realm, and we kind of are, but maybe it's still inside of our head, and it's still these beings that we're talking to are a reflection of us. Because like Chris was talking about, like, unless, like, as far as alien abductions go, right? He says, unless you're being like taken by like one of these government, like, kind of things, for the most part, they've all been like really positive interactions, that people have had like fantastic interactions like these, like they've been given knowledge that they need, like advice and things that they need. And I'm like, maybe that's you. Maybe that's your subconscious talking to you. Like, I don't want to take away from someone that has had an experience. I don't want to say that it's all fake, but it's just an idea that I play with. Right. And so then the funnier part is like, when you think about these elitists that are communing with these like interdimensional beings, that's also a reflection of themselves, right? So when Hillary Clinton just sucks a baby's blood and like does some weird ritual or something, and she starts communing with interdimensional beings, like, that's why she's like, maybe that's why those like psychopaths are like given a completely different set of like instructions, or different things like that, because it's a reflection of themselves and wanting to consolidate power and to be these evil sick fucks. I don't know.
Yeah, they're bringing in the dark, right? And that's what
because they're bringing the dark, because they are. Yeah.
I can't disagree with it, right? I mean, I really feel that it has a lot to do with things, you know, because if you think about it, one way I like to look at it is you brought up Klaus Schwab before, and there's a lot of my normal people that I associate with that I ask them who Klaus Schwab is, and they're like, I don't know. And it's like, so in their world, he doesn't even exist. So it made me think at one point, well, is it us conjuring him up?
Yeah.
Do we keep him alive by keeping him out there as the boogeyman, right? If we paid no attention to him, would he just go away? But since we have to counter him and call him out all the time, do we give him the unnecessary energy to prop him up to keep him relevant? I always wonder that, because in other people's world, he doesn't even exist.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to say that about your friends, but maybe they don't exist, and that's why.
Oh, they're not my friends. They're just,
okay.
I don't have friends, dude. They're all parents of my son's friends and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, if they are just playing their role, you know, they're just, I mean, I find that fascinating too, because I think about the concept of, like, if you think about the Matrix and how the agents can just like shoot into any of those NPCs, right? You know how they go so like that. And I find that fascinating too. Like when you get like an angry, crazy feminist with crazy blue hairs and she's ready to attack you, and like, what happened? There was a switch and you get those eyes and stuff. And I'm like, that's whatever the darkness is just shot into that person.
Yeah. It's almost like a possession, you know? I mean, it's because you can't talk rationally to those people. They're in an emotional state that they're just seeing red. They're hearing sirens, you know, whatever you say is just the devil's words coming to them. So I don't know, man. It's like we live in two different worlds. You know, there's these insane people that all went with the narrative and still believe and trust the government and everything. And then there's those who have seen that, wait, what's going on the last couple of years is some serious fuckery. And they're like, I can't stand with this anymore. And so there's these two realities that are going on now. And it's almost a battle for which way are we going to go? Because you can't stay in limbo for too long. And I don't know.
Something that Chris brought up that actually gave me a little bit of peace was thinking, have you ever heard of Project Looking Glass? Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Yeah, that concept where I mean, maybe you could explain it to me better, because like they built some sort of machine that they could see into the future, like it like goes in between like dimensions sort of thing. But something that he said about it was that they looked into it and they said that every single time they lost, every time that they would try like a new thing, whatever their big scheme was to take over the world, it would fall apart. And I was like, man, that's so cool. I really hope that's true, because I do think that humanity will win. I think that we will win. I think that we got probably some really rough waters ahead of us, though.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, obviously, I think that the short term, it's going to get pretty ugly. But I think that, I mean, think about it. It's called growing pains for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? In order to progress, and when you reach rock bottom, the only way up, it's going to suck. You got to fight through. It's going to get tough. But
what if this is a game that we're designed to not lose, though? Like, we're supposed to win.
Oh, I don't think there's any way we can lose.
Yeah,
right?
I think that like you can
loses.
Yeah, in general, I think I think the individual can definitely, because in this realm, you can make this hell. Mm-hmm. You can make your perception and everything around you. You can make a personal hell by the decisions and the terrible things and the people you choose to be around with. But you can also make this place heaven. Yep. Right. And so maybe those are the folks that maybe they're just learning the lessons the hard way. And so they're going to just bound to be back almost infinite amount of times before they pull their head out.
Yeah, because it's the lessons learned, right? And that's what this is about. It's about live and learn. It's about experience. And some people don't experience, so they're stuck in that hamster wheel, and they don't even get a chance to get out of it. Whereas if you can,
that's true.
They just go, and that's it. That's their life. They're going to spend it in the wheel until they keel over and die, and that's their whole livelihood.
Well, I think about myself in a different situation, I would have been one of them. you know,
Mhm.
like, because I definitely, I started like on the left. I was a Bernie bro. I was like a fucking, I wasn't a, I was cringy, but I wasn't quite an SJW. But
Yeah.
you know, it was pretty bad, and it was just like a circumstance of you know, just different things and coincidences, or maybe it wasn't coincidence that brought me to where I am. You know, and I loved drugs. I was like getting strung out when I was a young man. Like when I was 16, I was like really, really on meth, dude. I loved it. Like I was,
Mhm.
and I just think of all these different things that if I hadn't done what I had done, and I hadn't had my son really early, I had my son really early, I could have easily been one of those guys stuck on the hamster wheel forever.
But you're not.
Yeah,
And
I'm
that's,
not.
yeah, and that I've heard there's so many people that say, if this didn't happen, but it did, right?
But it
And it
did.
happened for you and you learned the lesson and you moved forward. And that's the thing. People think, oh, I'm just here by shit luck. No, you're there by the decisions that you made, right? And we all do, but what do we want to do? We don't want to take ownership for it. It's easier to pass the buck and say, oh, my luck just sucks, or
Yeah,
it's someone else's fault. But we all play a role in it, and I'm guilty of it too. I mean, I'm as guilty as anybody. And I got divorced in 2020, and for like the first couple months afterwards, it was all her fault.
yeah,
It's all her fault. Yeah, she did this, she did that. And then finally I got to a point, I'm like, yeah, she did a lot of shitty stuff, but there were signs, and you could have tried to make it work too. And you kind of folded up your tent and packed in your bags too. So whatever,
yeah, yeah.
don't blame it on anybody else. And then when I did that, I was like, man, that whole thing left, like that guilt, that shame. It's like, okay, cool. It is what it is. Move on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And if you dwell in those things and you just keep blaming and keep pushing, like all you're going to do is just entrap yourself. You know, it's just,
Yep.
and then you get stuck in this cycle of just, ugh,
Oh, it's miserable,
yeah,
and that's why I want to go back to the 1800s, man. I want to get out of here. I want to go and see what they had, and whether it was electric vehicles or airships, whatever they're moving around in. I want to get in that and just get away from this nonsense and see if maybe I can be like like Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future or something, but actually go back and change something. I'll do a little butterfly effect and just change one little thing and maybe send this thing on a different route.
yeah. That's fascinating, man. So, what? How far? I mean, how far do you go as far as like the Tartaria stuff? As far as like this, like occulted, like knowledge and like maybe these like crazy technologies and these like different things like I know some people go a little far with it, and as far as like some of the utopian kind of like ideas, I question because I mean we're still humans, so
Yep.
I still have a hard time like believing some of the stuff.
Well, and the whole
But
thing with Tartaria is, and you mentioned Emmanuel before. I've done a couple shows with him on it because he did a great article called "WTF is a Tartarian," and he gave his 2 cents about it and basically said that these aren't something to look up to. This was Tartarus. This was hell, and that this is covered up for a reason. And I don't know if that's necessarily true that Tartaria was all evil, but I don't think it was this worldwide civilization with complete free energy and this peaceful, like you said before, utopian society. No, I don't. I haven't seen any evidence of that. Now,
I
do I
mean, it was
think?
still an empire, and empires survive
Yeah,
from like pillaging and taking, and yeah, I mean, there's
yeah.
no
I mean,
such thing as an empire
it
without it.
existed, right? I mean,
Yeah,
there was a physical landmass. There were empires. I mean, they had most of Russia. A lot of Russia, Europe, Mongolia area, northern China. That was all Tartarian lands. But back then, I mean, you could also called it Russia. Russo
so what's
China.
fascinating to me is like maybe like because I totally like there's no doubt about it there was an empire called Tartaria, right? There was in greater Tartary, right, and all of that landmass there. But I think that there's a disconnect because when people talk about Tartaria, they're also talking about something like Atlantis. They're also talking about something that stretched all over Western Europe. They're talking about like like these buildings behind you and things like that. And do you think that there's a connection? Do you think those are two separate things? And a lot of times people cram that idea together. Like, I
Yeah.
think that there's probably a lot to that.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely do. I mean, it's our history's been so flipped upside down, and there's been people put in there that are characters, and so it's tough to really tell. But at some point on this realm, there was a free energy. That's for sure. We know there's free energy because you're starting to see it now. All these different ways and methods of free energy that would have been accessible to them. And the way I look at it is, who's to say that we're the most civilized now, right? And that's the way we look at everything. We look backwards at them like, oh, they didn't have this, they didn't have that. What if they did, right? Because I mean, if you go back to a lot of the even Egyptian monuments, Sumerian times, these gods were carrying bags, right? What's to say that wasn't a tablet? What's to say that wasn't some electronic device or some, it doesn't even have to be electronic, some ethereal device, energy device that could do things that we can't do today. So
yeah, absolutely, man. I think about that too, is like, because to me, I mean, I don't know how Christian you are. I mean, I consider myself like a Christ follower, sort of like how Emmanuel Kingman talks about it. But I'm curious where they talk about like the Tower of Babel. And so like before then, it was like the world was all connected. We all spoke one language. There was all like one culture. And it's fascinating to me because you see these same like monoliths and these big structures and different things that are so similar all over the world. Right. And like star forts and these pyramids and all of these like crazy things that how are they so similar? In Peru as the same thing in Egypt, and
and they're credited to Egypt. They're credited to the Romans. They're credited to the Greeks, right? And it's almost like those are the only civilizations that had any bearing on this planet whatsoever. And no, you look back and like you're saying, it seems like there was a time where all of this was taking place. Now, I really think this, we've gone through many changes on this planet. So, what's to say we're not just uncovering electricity or electricity technology that they already had?
Yeah,
you look at our modern cities, they just look like a motherboard of a computer. So we're just taking things on the macro level now. We're making them just larger than they were before. But if you look back then, even, I mean, you look at the 3 major pyramids in Egypt, they all line up like Orion's belt. Well, you go over to Mexico, the 3 pyramids over there also line with Orion's belt. Well, then you go over to China, 3 pyramids over there align with Orion's belt. Well, those are 3 separate parts of the globe that have the exact same layout. And there's no interconnection whatsoever, you're trying to tell me? I mean, that's where they lose me with these, these historians, because that's why I feel like people like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, who are contrarians, they're going against the grain and they're getting shunned by the mainstream, but they're pushing ahead with facts but they're facts that go against the narrative. And that's where things get dicey. Right? Anytime you go against the narrative, against the Smithsonian, against any of these big groups, you're going to be shunned. You're going to be, they're going to try and make you look foolish. They're going to try and discredit you any way they can, because that's their only weapon. They can't back their stories with evidence. They back their stories with more stories. Whereas Graham and these guys are coming with evidence, with facts.
Yeah, man, it's super fascinating. And it is just funny to me how they or not funny, really, just how they try to occult all of this. And like you said, I mean, that was probably the big time where they were establishing the narrative was around that 1850 area in those world fairs and things. Because like, correct me where I'm wrong, but I heard that there was like exhibits where they'd be like, this is an Aborigine. This is a Chinaman. this
They
is
had Nate. They had human
yeah,
zoos.
yeah.
They
And
had
so they were
human
telling you,
zoos.
this is what an Ottoman is with his scimitar, and he wears this hat, and they were just trying to like,
Yeah, they would set up exhibit. They would set up like a zoo, right? And it was little what was those things? Dioramas, right? Remember you make a diorama back in school back in the day, and they had these. It was scenes where they would have these live people, and they always talked down to them, right? The
yeah,
Aboriginals, they were always, less than, and because one of the things was with these world fairs, and it seemed like they were very racist. They were very
yeah.
white European oriented, and that was what it was. It was bringing in the Industrial Revolution. It was bringing in this era of European dominance, right? Because now America had been settled by Europeans. You had Europe. They were colonial all over the world, and
So there must have been a fall. There must have been something that happened that allowed these, whatever these people are, these elitists that I guess came from Europe, that gave them the opportunity to rewrite history. I wonder what really happened, because like we hear about the history of like in the 1700s and stuff, but we don't know what the hell actually happened.
no. And then you get things like the catacombs in France, where you just have millions of bones with little to no real explanation, right? They're
Yeah,
going to
those
say,
are
oh, the
gruesome,
plague
man.
and this and that. It's bullshit. There was a mass extinction event or events that took place. Now, I can't pinpoint it. That's like my great search right now, is to find out what caused the last reset, right? Why did the population change so much? And why did all of a sudden it need to be like the earth needed to be repopulated with orphans and such? And, they opened up America so we could flood this area. So I don't know. Now, what you find is there's the mud flood theory out there, right? Which I don't agree with. If you're going to say it was one cataclysmic event that happened worldwide, because there's really no evidence of that other than the biblical flood, right? We can go back to that one. But post-biblical flood, there's no evidence of a one event. Now, what we do see, on the other hand, are multiple events. We see things like the Carrington event in the 1870s, which is basically like a giant EMP that hit the earth. You have natural disasters, right? You have massive earthquakes. You have, which we're learning, these earthquakes are what cause mud floods.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I saw those videos.
Yeah,
different like vibrations or like things like that makes the mud turn into a liquid.
It'll make the mud turn to a liquid, so you'll have buildings sink. Now, where have you seen a building sunk before? The Leaning Tower of Pisa is the number one example that they show to us over and over, that they say, oh, it was built like that, or it sunk like that over time. No, that was part of a mud flood. That ground was moving, that thing sunk and is now on an angle. And that's what you see. You see the heavy objects sink, and then what you'll also see is what was buried underneath start to rise. And that's where a lot of stuff is too. We don't know what's under our feet in a lot of areas.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most tragic things too, is like how much of, like, if you look at a map, how much of America is like considered like government territory or government like property and things like that. Like how much of those occult like special places are just taken and like, this is ours.
Well, and it's not only do they do it with the government, they do it with golf courses. That's another one. You golf courses are a great place to hide different things, especially mounds, right? The ancient mounds, because what do golf courses always have? Those hilly terrains and sand traps and all that stuff. That's what Michelle Gibson leads you to believe, is that a lot of these golf courses are just cover-ups.
That's super fascinating. So let's go back to San Francisco for a minute. So like you said, it had only been like civilized for about 5 to 10 years. And then we had all these crazy, beautiful buildings and things like, so I like so I listened to your whole series that you did about like Tartaria and different things and how, and I thought this was a fun concept that or maybe like some of the eastern part of Tartaria had gone in through like Alaska and maybe into like parts of North America. Do you think some of those buildings could have been actually Tartarian? Do you think that some of those like,
I think they're old world for sure. I think there
yeah,
was presence. I mean, it's funny because what I'm starting to lean towards is kind of the and Anatoly Fomenko thought on this, and that's his idea, is that Tartaria was mainly in Europe, but it also went across the land bridge from Russia through Alaska into Western Canada, and basically stayed either west of the Rockies or west of the Mississippi. And I think initially it was probably the Mississippi that was kind of the barrier. And over time, they ceded back towards the other side of the Rockies. But I mean, the Chinese were building railroads over here. We don't know how long ago. There's, the Russians or Tartarians, whatever you want to say, were over here, I believe, beforehand. And that's where a lot of this was built. And why don't look at a lot of the old maps. That area is labeled as like parts unknown.
Yeah.
Or, uncharted territory.
Well, to go back to like the cover up too, I mean, I do think about this a lot. Like, what did they do to the Native American kids? Like, they would kill their parents, and then they would take all of these orphans, and then they would put them in these re-education camps, and they would occult their language, they would occult their practices, they would teach them all your history and your religion. That's all mythology. That's all fake. This is what reality is. This is Jesus.
Yeah. And one of the real interesting things is if you look at Meriwether Lewis and you look at the Lewis and Clark expedition in the early 1800s, Meriwether Lewis, there's pages missing from his journal. And supposedly that's his interaction when they found things on the other side of the Rockies. One of the things that's rumored was giants, that there was giants over there. There was all sorts of different things over there that were already living there, and those pages were removed. And interestingly enough, he died by 2 self-inflicted gunshot wounds.
Yeah, that seems the MO. Right?
That's normal, right? Yeah. So, but yeah, these are the things you see over and over again. And you look at the history of the West. The history of the Western United States was written basically by one man, and his name is H.H. Bancroft. And this guy wrote something like 60,000 pages in, 20 years, something like that. I mean, so basically, and what his story is, he was a small-time book dealer in Buffalo, New York. Now, this is interesting because these couple cities always turn up: Buffalo, Chicago, San Francisco. From the 1800s on, these are 3 major cities. And I think, like we were talking about before, these tie into the old world. These were old world capitals. And so this guy's an old-time book dealer in the mid 1800s. He's told to go to San Francisco in the early 1850s to go sell books. Who's he selling books to? Fucking miners? Gold miners are going to go buy these books that he's selling. But what the theory is he went out there to find books, anything and everything, collect it all, gather it, and we're going to hoard it and then rewrite our version of it. Yeah. And that's why this guy, so he's written everything from, the states all the way west to all the native tribes, everything. I mean, this guy is written on everything, and he's basically the sole expert on everything Western American history.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, it's I hate it.
So just, and then that's why I did the podcast, because I started seeing this, right? It was like I started seeing all these stories over and over, like Columbus. That was one that slapped me in the face too. It was like, first of all, he's not the first guy over here. He's not even close to being the first one over here. He didn't discover anything. There were already people living here. So, and the whole just nonsense. And then we celebrate him with a national holiday when he basically just came over here and started the genocide.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's a fascinating thing. I mean, so because I actually, when I was in college, I took a lot of Native American history courses and things like that, and that whole concept. And man, who wrote that book? I can't think of it right now, but the American anyway. So Howard Zinn. I read his book. What the heck is the name of his book? Do you know what I'm talking about? The something history of the United States, whatever it was. Yeah. And just that whole concept of just him landing here and just like, yeah, celebrating that piece of shit. And I don't know how much of that is real either. Right. But
No.
about how he enslaved those islands and had them going for gold, and then, and would chop ears off and do all these terrible things. And I'm fairly certain that he probably did do those horrific things, but
there's rumors he didn't even exist.
Yeah.
There's things that he's a figment of the imagination, or that the character that he's portrayed as isn't even him, that he's really like Portuguese. So but that's what they do. And that's what's so frustrating, is that we are indoctrinated with these stories that aren't the real story, and that's the point of my podcast, is to bring some stuff that I'm learning about history. And I'm a history guy like you, man. I'm a history nerd, whether it's, this history. I was big into sports history as a kid. And I just love the old times and learning about why things are the way they are. Cause like they say, history repeats itself. Right. And if you don't learn, you're going to just doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So I figure, hey, if we go back far enough, we got to see where we screwed up and maybe we can fix this. But the more you go back, you're like, shit, what's real? Right?
Yeah, what's real? Yeah.
We don't know if we know our calendar's off. We don't know, what date we're in really, because they've manipulated that so many times. We could be off by as much as 1,000 years, according to some people.
Yeah, to me, that's so fascinating too. I mean, thinking about is human history millions of years old? Or are we on a very short time? Have we only been here for 2,000 years? I have no idea. Or maybe the time of Christ was really 200 years ago.
Yeah.
300 years ago. I don't know how short our, anything is, man. It's just super fascinating.
We can't tell, right? Because what we don't have is a lot of original source material anymore. That's been hoarded by the Vatican. That's been destroyed by groups like the Smithsonian, these groups that go out there. And if we could get access to the Vatican archives and the Smithsonian archives, we would have a better understanding of what we're on, where we are, when we are, and what's going on here. But they don't want that.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thing. And then let's say I tell all this to a normie, and then they're on this journey with me, and then they'll just say, well, why? Why are they covering it up? And
it doesn't benefit them for us to know, because in reality, when we know that, we are more powerful than we know, but we've been indoctrinated to believe that we have to stay at this level. We can't rise up against the government, right? We can't us poor little civilians, we can't bond together and tell these people, no, this isn't how you do it. This is how we want it. We've just been, okay, you have choice A or choice B, and you have to pick between the two. Well, choice A and choice B are on the same team. You're just picking one or the other so that there's a figurehead out there. And that's all it is. You have no real choice when it comes to that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what they do to us. They always give us this illusion of choice, right? And it's always, we get to choose between Coke and Pepsi.
A and B. Yep. Red or blue. Right. And that's all it is. And why? It's so that they have something to divide you over, because not everybody's going to choose red. Not everybody's going to choose blue. And then red and blue are going to be against each other.
Well, I think it's brilliant too. I mean, because I always, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but this is just my gut. I blame almost every modern problem on the British Empire. you know, and because you can really trace so much of it back to the British
Oh, they're
Empire.
still in it today.
Yeah.
Don't let them fool you. They got their hands dangling. They're like one of the puppet masters out there.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it was brilliant because they learned over hundreds of years or however many years just like perfectly how to divide us. And I think that probably the smartest thing they ever did was when they said, okay, we're going to make the monarchy a figurehead. And really, this is your government over here. You have these guys over here. So blame them. And then you can vote for this guy and you can do this guy. And then, but really, I think that the monarchy never actually stepped down. I don't think that they ever were really out of power. And it's what they had to do here in America is like we, I guess, maybe learned our lesson at the time, right, in 1776 or whatever it was, like, or whatever year that actually happened, right, where we had to realize that if there's just one political party that's in charge or one government, one figurehead, like when people are pissed, like what happened in the French Revolution, there's going to be heads rolling, right? And so if they can keep us divided and fighting with each other, and we can be, oh, I'm team red, I'm team blue, then we'll be fighting each other and not looking up at, you know, who's actually in charge. And we can't ever unite as a people to take the government down because we are so divided ourselves.
You nailed it. That's it right there. You know, that's the name of the game, divide and conquer. That's their whole mission, because if they can keep us fighting with each other, we don't look up and realize that they're the ones that keep, you know, we're like the Roman gladiators, right? And they just keep dropping the tiger in there, drop another one in. Okay, you fight this one. All right, we got another one for you. All right, you beat that one, we got another one for you. And it's never ending, you know, and as long as they can have those two, and if you think about it though, it's the only way they live, because in essence, what have they created? They've created a battery. They've created two poles that are energetically charged, and they're just the ones in the middle. And if these two poles aren't charged, that middle just falls out. It's useless. It has no power anymore. So they need those two sides. And they've brilliantly, again, you have to give them credit because it's worked. They've found a way to do it, and people just keep asking for more.
Yeah, man, it's fascinating. I do think about like what it must have been like, and people have written books about this, but it was like the first time that I decided that I'm the king, and I've convinced enough people that they need to listen to me and that they need to pay some sort of homage to me, and that they have to give me some of their grain, and then, or like taxes, and have the civilization and this whole like organization, and I'm in charge, and I have to convince you that I have the right ideas and I'm doing this for the greater good and things like that. And it was just the biggest scam, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah. They're just con artists, you know, and that's what it is. But the other thing too, is they base it on when you're getting at the real high levels, it's all bloodlines. That's all it boils down to. It's all where you're born from.
What do you think it is? Do you think that there's actually something unique to them? Because I know that a lot of them,
I think they're the line of Cain. They're the Canaanites.
That's fascinating. Yeah, because a lot of them do like to tie themselves back to like I've heard that lots of them like to tie themselves back to even Nephilim and things like that they have these angelic bloodlines and things. And
I think they all go back to the line of Cain, you know, because in essence, I think there was three lines, right? You had the line of Seth, you had the line of Cain, and so I don't know.
It's a tough one, man.
Because it's definitely based on bloodline, though, because there's a reason why they keep it, quote unquote, in the family, right? They just, you look at the royals. I mean, even you laugh because everybody's like, oh, it's so amazing that he chose Meghan Markle. She's royalty. What people don't realize, her family's royalty. So
he's her cousin.
Yeah, none of this stuff happens. And why do you get things like the Habsburg jaw? Right? Because they inbred so much, they started creating these birth defects. So to think these people are better than us is comical, because most of them are literally retarded because of the inbreeding.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the ones that you never hear about. Those are the ones that stay in the closet.
That's Prince Andrew.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, dude, he's pretty bad.
He's retarded.
He's pretty bad.
He's a retard. Yeah, he's got to have like Asperger's or something, just running around, finger blasting anything that he can, and sweating all over chicks. It's like, come on, man. And then to claim, oh, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. No.
I don't even have sweat glands.
Oh, it's great, man. But that's where if we can see the end of the monarchy, that'll be a beautiful thing, because things will change when that monarchy comes crashing down.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Yeah. No kings. Well, for myself, I say no king but Christ, but
although
yeah.
Kings, some would argue kings are better than presidents.
Well, yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, that all goes back to, I mean, I love, man, why can't I think of his name right now? My brain's not going to work. But there was that book, Democracy, the God That Failed. Have you ever read
Yes.
that? Hans Hermann Hoppe. Yeah, that whole concept. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is super fascinating. And I do think that he's definitely right about that.
He's got points.
Probably, monarchy is definitely preferable than democracy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because we're not
direct democracy
either. That's the other thing. It's like, we want a republic. That's what we want. We don't want a democracy, because democracy is just
God forbid we had a democracy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like half the country is absolutely out of their fucking mind. And so is the other half, just in a different way.
Yeah. It just takes 51% in a democracy.
Yeah.
That's all it takes. It's majority rule. It's not, equality. It's wrapped in a different box.
Absolutely, brother. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate you. This was a fucking fascinating conversation. We're going to have to do it again. I've got like a million more questions for you, dude. Thanks, brother. Do you want to tell my audience one more time where they can find all you? And you have a Patreon too, so all my listeners need to go and subscribe to your Patreon.
Yeah, I just started Patreon. You can find all my stuff on, go to my Instagram page at The Great Deception Podcast, and you have to type in The Great Deception and get to at least the P before I'll pop up. But put The Great Deception Podcast in there, and I have a link tree in my bio. Has a link to everything. I have a YouTube channel. I have, like I said, I just started a Patreon where I put all the video of the Monday Night Master Debaters is up there for any tier that you're in. So I got a $3, $5, and $8 tier. So any donation is greatly appreciated, guys. Like Nate said, these episodes take a lot of time and a lot of materials. So it's not something I just whip up out of nowhere. Each one of my episodes is probably a good 40 to 50 hours for one show. So
damn, brother. Yeah.
It's worth it though, to get out the material. I want to get it out in like a, kind of a professional manner, so I can, have some credibility behind it. So eventually one day, my son can listen to this stuff and not think I was as crazy as his mom says.
Yeah, see, I have the opposite problem. I get smarter people to come on, and I usually am just talking shit. So I appreciate what you do, because you can really tell the difference, man. You fucking put in a lot of work, and I fucking love your show. And thank you so much, man.
Oh, I appreciate it, Nate. Thanks for having me, man.
All right, brother. I'm going to hit the outro and hang on for a second. I'll chat with you for a second.